Get rolling. We're in 1980, the election of 1980. Here's Ronald Reagan, former Hollywood actor. You can see there's one of his feature films, Bedtime for Bonzo. He got involved in politics. He was the governor of California. He's with the Republican Party. And you can see he's easily able to win this election of 1980. He's going to defeat Jimmy Carter, by the way. He's got a few like quotes that totally stand out. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Well, the nation was struggling in the late 1970s. You had the, economic crisis, you had inflation, you had an oil crisis, you had the hostages in Iran. You had a lot of things where you could not really answer yes to are you better off than you were 4 years ago. So they're able to kind of run with that message. And then this is the big idea proposed by not only Reagan, but the Republican Party from this point forward. Government is not the solution to the problem. Government is the problem. They basically want to scale back all the big government programs that were enacted by Democrats really from the 1930s on. Think the New Deal, think the Great Society. They now want to scale that back. So that will be a priority for the Republican Party kind of from this point forward. Government's not the solution to the problem. Government is the problem. Again, there are your years, Republican. And he's also going to have the support of kind of, I would describe it as our third religious Great Awakening. Remember all of our Great Awakenings in American history? Maybe you remember the one from like the 1830s. Maybe you remember the one like 1750s. Well, this is our third like super religious revival with kind of the new right, moral majority, new conservatism. Think of it going back to like traditional 1950s like values. And these guys are going to, condemn, say, the working woman. They want to go back to, family values. And Ronald Reagan is going to be able to, capitalize on their support. So understand something about the new right, the moral majority. One main issue that gets all of these guys together will be abortion. So they're very much against the Roe v. Wade decision, and the Republican Party will, come out as totally pro-life rather than pro-choice. Here's Ronald Reagan. Big questions we always get will be over his economic plan. His economic plan is to cut taxes. And he's going to cut taxes significantly, calling this, supply side economics or Reaganomics, as it's often called. Now, we do need to evaluate this thing because they believe that cutting taxes will lead to economic growth. Again, we need to evaluate this, and we've got a whole lot of history now to see if this works. Cut taxes, and it's going to result in economic growth. You can see, writing on the chalkboard, economic growth reduces deficit to new low. Economic growth reduces deficit to new low. That's not going to happen. That's one of the problems with this whole supply side. Because if you think about it, taxes pay for things, right? Taxes are going to pay for, the military. Taxes are going to pay for social services. Taxes pay for the government to do things. But if you now cut taxes, you can't pay the bills. So what happens as a result? Deficits or the national debt will start to skyrocket. So you got to understand, this is when our national debt begins to just totally get out of control. It's in the 1980s. Does it work? Well, you're going to see it works for a certain group, but it definitely does not for another. And we've got empirical evidence now to back this up. The whole balanced budget, this is the era of our national debt, which if you look at it on a historic scale, our national debt was nominal up to this point, but it grows more than any other president under Reagan's watch in the 1980s. Here's where Reaganomics works. It works for the top 1%. You cut taxes for the wealthy, they become super wealthy. The other 99%, well, they're actually doing worse from the 1980s on. So just kind of understand that the rich they get super rich. In fact, there's a nickname for them in the 1980s. They're called yuppies. This is like young urban professional, where they have conspicuous consumption. They wear a Rolex, they drive a BMW, they got one of these cool looking cell phones. But everyone else who may have benefited from what tax dollars did for everyone, well, they don't get the big tax cut, and it does not necessarily trickle down to them, as you see by this chart. So do understand that trickle down, it works for the super rich. Historically, it has not worked for anyone outside of this. Who struggles the most? The inner cities. In fact, these are pictures of Detroit. You got to understand that the inner city was just left to, decay, where they were overly dependent on taxpayer dollars, on government programs. But now all of this stuff will be cut because, again, that's not really part of the whole Reagan economic plan. So as inner city funding is cut, you've got major problems in the inner cities in the 1980s. You've got a drug epidemic. You've got poverty, and there's not much support for the inner city through that time. So programs are going to be cut to try to offset the deficits, but this is a great contributor to the rising cost of the 1980s. Remember our defense, how we've always spent a lot on defense kind of from the end of World War II on? Well, now we're going to bring our national defense to outer space. And we literally call this Star Wars, or SDI. It's a strategic defense initiative where we want to be able to shoot nuclear weapons down from outer space. It's far-fetched. It's not too practical in the 1980s, but this is going to cost a ton of money. So do understand that this is going to cost and cost and cost a lot. But what's another fundamental part of Reaganomics? Cutting taxes. So how do you pay for all of this? That's the big question you got to ask yourself. How do you pay for this increased defense spending? The answer is you don't. We go into debt. So this one is showing you debt from the past few administrations. Here's where the debt is really going to start to happen. It'll continue under Bush's watch. We actually had surpluses with the Clinton administration, and this one takes it through George W. Bush. He also would cut taxes, and we're going to go to war. I've got a few others that you can see that are a little more recent. This is deficit by presidential party. You can see, deficit, it's nominal, 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 and then we're really starting to hit some deficits going into the 70s and 80s, surplus with Clinton, mega deficit starting with George W. Bush and continuing with President Obama. Again, kind of the same thing. And here's the entire U.S. debt under each president, where each of these little blocks represents, I believe, like $3 billion. Well, take a look at the last, 6. This is when the national debt is really starting to skyrocket. And they may need to revise this, because if you're actually thinking about this entire, pandemic stimulus package where, everyone's getting a check, business is getting a lot of money back, that's an additional several $1 trillion that's going to hit right here. So this national debt, it's going up and up and up and up and up and up and up, especially in our generation. We'll see what happens with all of that, one other thing with Reagan, that curse of Tecumseh is going to be broken. Remember going back to 1840, if you win an election ending in a zero, you're going to be assassinated. Well, Reagan was actually shot, but he didn't die. So a crazy guy trying to impress a Hollywood actress shoots the president, paralyzes James Brady. It would result in a whole lot of gun control because these guys would not have background checks. Anyone could buy a gun. Eventually, by the 1990s, kind of a waiting period if you wanted to buy a handgun was passed. So this does spark some gun control because a totally crazy guy was able to get a gun and shoot the president. A little more on Reagan. There's the first female on the Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor. He's big with confronting the Soviet Union, calling them an evil empire, telling Gorbachev to tear down the wall. So kind of think the Nixonian policies of détente. Well, that's not happening so much. Now, Reagan is much more confrontational. Nixon was trying to, relax things. Reagan is much more in your face. He's easily going to win in 1984. He had the clear majorities. He's going to defeat Walter Mondale, but it is a significant side note that the first female vice presidential candidate ever was under the Democratic ticket in 84. Not that. Not that. With foreign affairs, maybe world history covered a little bit of Mikhail Gorbachev, the new Soviet leader, a reformer, and he's going to kind of change the Soviet Union during its final years. He's going to have more of an openness with free speech, with glasnost and perestroika. I don't know if you remember that term from Miss Fleece, Miss Mercer, but that's going to be some economic changes where you can, I don't know, have a small business, I suppose, if you want to. This is going to be a major thing. It is a mega scandal during the 1980s. Really complicated and possibly best explained through a weird cartoon that I can provide in an additional video clip here. But in a nutshell, we illegally and secretly sold weapons to Iran, a country that hates us. We then funnel that money to anti communists in Central America. All of this without congressional approval. It's big, it's scandalous. People go to prison for it. Was Reagan directly involved? No, but it got really, really close to his inner circle. You'll kind of see the continuing aftermath of this. In fact, some of the people involved are still out there today. If you want to look at a few of the names. But anyway, the American Dad cartoon, it's a quick 90-second song that explains it. So watch it. You'll like it. We go to war. We're also back against the big evil country of Grenada. You're like, what? Where's Grenada? I don't even know if you can find it on a map. There it is. You see Grenada? Blip. Little blip of an island in the Caribbean. Now, what happens in this terror island? Well, they went communist. So we send in the full force of our military and we overthrow them in about 24 hours. Flex our muscles, we're back. So the might of the American military, we overthrow the communists in Grenada. There you go. So some military involvement under the Reagan administration. We also get, cable television in the 1980s. That's going to revolutionize things with MTV and TBS and BET. You get, all of these things, all news. But think about what TV was like prior to cable TV. This was my childhood, early 1980s. We had 3 channels. That was it. Now think about what you guys have today. You got anything and everything. So a little bit for all with cable TV and how that's revolutionized entertainment. Another thing of the 80s, you get a Just Say No campaign against drugs. Drugs were becoming a major problem in the 80s. The first lady, this is Nancy Reagan, they generally have like some big thing. So every first lady, really in at least my generation, maybe going to Eleanor Roosevelt, they've got a thing that they're behind. Nancy Reagan is to just say no to drugs. So everyone would wear these little stickers and buttons. Does it work? They don't end drugs. They declare war on drugs, but that didn't really work out all that well. So Just Say No campaign. Just kind of think about that one. What else do we have? The AIDS epidemic is going to happen in the 1980s. A little bit of an unknown at first of how this thing was caused. It did generally hit a lot of homosexuals, so there was kind of blame placed on alternative lifestyles in the 80s. And this whole religious reform, they're kind of arguing that's justification for alternative lifestyles. So do understand that this thing plays a role with the rise of the moral majority and the new conservatism of the 1980s. AIDS became political, very political, and there was not much funding towards the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s and early 1990s. So, just a little bit of background. I think you're familiar, at least with what it is. Um, Over 100 cabinet. So, Ryan White, interesting little side note story if you ever watched that. But again, the conservative response kind of places blame on alternative lifestyles for causing and kind of escalating this thing. Social activism becomes a big thing in the 1980s. Maybe you've heard "We Are the World, We Are the Children, We Are the Ones Who Make a Brighter Day." I messed up the lyrics, but maybe I'll give you that link. If not, it's a song of every big like musical celebrity in the 80s singing for like feeding Africa. Africa was starving, major food problem there. So they're going to bring money, social activism for Africa. We are the world. We are the children. Ooh, technology. Look at this. Technology in the 1980s. You've got a tech boom in Silicon Valley. So there's where Silicon Valley is located. That's going to cause a lot of people to move to California. Hey, buddy.
Mommy needs you back.
Mommy needs me?
Yeah, because Charlie was messing with a bird and it hurt it bad.
Charlie messed with a bird.
Yeah, it was trying to eat it.
Where's the bird?
In Mommy's hands.
Oh, no. All right. Part 2 coming up.